Jake Morrison walked through the curved metal halls of Nexus 7 Station, his worn backpack heavy on his shoulders. The artificial gravity felt slightly different from Earth's pull, making each step feel like he was bouncing just a little. Around him, dozens of alien students moved between classes, their strange voices mixing together in a chorus of clicks, hisses, and musical tones. He had been at the Galactic Academy for 3 weeks now, and he still felt out of place. The other students towered over him or scuttled past on multiple legs or floated by using tentacles to grip the walls. Jake was just human. Average height, brown hair, regular clothes. Nothing special about him at all. The classroom door slid, open with a soft whisper, and Jake slipped inside. He always sat in the back corner away from the others. Not because he was shy, but because he had learned it was easier that way. The alien students seemed more comfortable when they didn't have to look at him directly. Professor Zixtal glided into the room, her purple tentacles moving in smooth waves as she approached the front. She was one of the nicer teachers, Jake thought. At least she didn't make faces when she called on him. Her species, the Veltar, communicated partly through color changes in their skin, and Jake had noticed she always stayed a calm blue-green when talking to humans. "Good morning, class," the professor said, her voice carrying the slight echo that all Veltar had. "Today we continue our study of dangerous predators across the galaxy." Jake pulled out his tablet and stylus, trying to ignore the way some of the other students glanced back at him. He caught the eye of Lisa Carter, the only other human in the class, sitting 3 rows ahead. She gave him a small smile and wave. Lisa was braver than him, always sitting closer to the front, always trying to make friends with the aliens. Jake admired that about her, but he preferred to stay quiet and watch. A large Saurian student named Krexvor turned in his seat, his yellow eyes fixed on Jake. Krexvor was nearly 8 feet tall, with green-black scales and sharp teeth that he showed when he talked. His people came from a desert world where they hunted in packs. "I still don't understand why the humans are in this class," Krexvor said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "Their world is listed as dangerous, but look at them. No claws, no armor, no venom. They can't even see in the dark properly." Several other students turned to stare. Jake felt his face get warm, but he kept his eyes on his tablet. He had heard this before. The Galactic Council had classified Earth as a Class 12, Deathworld, which meant it was considered extremely dangerous. But when the aliens met actual humans, they couldn't understand why. A Clicktar student named Zit-Click rubbed her forearms together, making a sound like glass breaking. "My people have studied the human database entries," she said in her buzzing voice. "Their most dangerous predator is something called a tiger. It hunts alone using only teeth and claws, very basic." "Exactly," Krexvor agreed, his tail swishing behind him. "On my world, we have rock crushers that can bite through starship hulls. The Clicktar have crystal wasps that can phase through solid matter. And humans are afraid of large cats?" Professor Zixtal's tentacles curled slightly, a sign that she was becoming annoyed. "Every world develops differently," she said carefully. "Perhaps we should focus on today's lesson." But Krexvor wasn't finished. He stood up, his full height making other students move away from him. "I think there's been a mistake in the classification system. Humans should be in the basic biology classes, not advanced predator studies. They're too soft for this material." Jake's hands tightened around his stylus, but he said nothing. Lisa half-turned in her seat, looking like she wanted to say something, but Jake caught her eye and shook his head slightly. It was better to let it go. A Mirthal student named Glubaria rose up from her water-filled chair, her blue-green skin glistening. The Mirthal breathed water, so she wore a special helmet filled with liquid from her home ocean. "On my world," she said in her bubbling voice, "we have void krakens in our deepest waters. They can survive in space and crush ships with their tentacles. What does Earth have that compares to that?" Other students began to murmur agreement. Jake heard whispered comments about human weakness, about the mistake in the classification system, about how humans probably needed protection just to survive on their own world. His jaw tightened, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Professor," Zixtel's skin flickered to a warning orange. "That is enough," she said firmly. "We are here to learn, not to make judgments about each other's worlds." She activated the holographic display at the front of the room. A three-dimensional image appeared, showing a massive creature with crystalline spikes jutting from its back. "Today we will examine the boar worms of Kepler 442b. These creatures can tunnel through solid rock using vibrations that—" "Professor," Krexvor interrupted, still standing. "I apologize, but I think this is a waste of time. If we're going to study real predators, we should focus on species that actually matter, not worlds with house cats as their apex hunters." The classroom fell silent. Jake could feel everyone looking at him and Lisa. His heart was beating faster now, and something hot was building in his chest. He thought about his grandfather's stories, about diving trips off the coast of California, about things that lived in Earth's oceans that these aliens couldn't even imagine. Lisa started to stand up. "Actually, I think you might be surprised about what Earth—" "No," Krexvor said, waving a clawed hand dismissively. "Humans hunt by chasing prey until it gets tired. That's not predation. That's just being too weak to kill efficiently. Real predators strike fast and hard." Jake felt something snap inside him. Slowly, very slowly, he stood up. The movement was quiet, controlled, but somehow it made the entire room go still. Even Professor Zixtel stopped talking and turned to look at him. When Jake spoke, his voice was calm and steady, but there was something underneath it that made the sensitive species in the room take a step back without knowing why. "Professor," he said politely, "could you please display Earth's oceans on the hologram?" Professor Zixtel touched the control panel with one of her tentacles. The holographic display shifted and changed, showing a beautiful blue and green sphere floating in the darkness of space. Earth appeared in the center of the room, slowly, rotating so everyone could see the vast oceans that covered most of its surface. "Interesting choice," the professor said, her skin color shifting to curious yellow. "Earth's oceans cover approximately 71% of the planet's surface." Krexvor snorted, a sound like steam escaping from a pipe. Of course the human wants to talk about water. Probably the safest place on their world. He turned to face the other students, his scaled lips pulling back to show his sharp teeth in what his species considered a smile. "I bet their ocean predators are just bigger versions of those house cats." Several students made their species versions of laughter. The Clicktar clicked their arms together rapidly, while the Myrthul made bubbling sounds through their water helmets. Even some of the quieter species seemed amused by Krexvor's joke. Jake stood perfectly still, watching the image of his homeworld turn slowly in the air. His hands were relaxed at his sides, but Lisa noticed that his breathing had changed. She had known Jake for 3 weeks now, and she had never seen him look quite like this. "You think our oceans are safe?" Jake asked quietly. His voice was so calm that it made the room feel colder somehow. Krexvor's tail swished back and forth, a sign of confidence in his species. "Compared to real dangers, yes. On my world, we have desert stalkers that can track prey across continents. They move so fast they appear as blurs, and their claws can cut through battle armor." He gestured to his own natural weapons, flexing his fingers to show razor-sharp talons. "That's a real predator." Zitclick raised 2 of her 4 arms. "The crystal wasps of my homeworld can phase in and out of solid matter," she added, her voice buzzing with pride. "They inject their victims with venom that makes them see things that aren't there, then hunt them while they're confused. Some of our wasps are as large as your human vehicles." "Very impressive," said Glubaria from her water-filled chair. "But nothing compares to our void krakens. They live in the deepest parts of our oceans, so deep that the pressure would crush most starships. But they can also survive in the vacuum of space. They use their tentacles to grab passing ships and pull them down to the bottom of our seas." Other students began sharing stories of their own world's predators. The room filled with descriptions of creatures that could breathe fire, turn invisible, or survive being shot with plasma weapons. Each story seemed designed to prove that their world was more dangerous than Earth. Jake listened to all of it without saying a word. He watched the hologram of Earth continue to rotate, showing the Pacific Ocean, then the Atlantic, Then the Indian Ocean. So much water, so much life hiding beneath the surface. Fascinating stories, Jake said finally. But I noticed something interesting about all your predators. Professor Zixtal's tentacles curled with interest. What do you notice, Jake? They all evolved to hunt land creatures or space creatures, or creatures that think like you do. Jake's voice was still quiet, but now everyone in the room was listening. Your desert stalkers are fast because they need to catch prey that runs away. Your crystal wasps use confusion because they hunt creatures that can fight back with tools and weapons. Your void krakens are strong because they need to break things that are built to resist them. Krexvor's yellow eyes narrowed. What's your point, human? Jake looked directly at the large saurian. My point is that all your predators had to evolve special abilities because their prey was smart enough to develop defenses. But what if the prey never had a chance to evolve defenses? What if the predator was so perfectly designed that evolution just stopped trying to improve it? The room went very quiet. Several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Professor, Zixtal's skin flickered between colors as she tried to understand what Jake was suggesting. That's impossible, Krexvor said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. Evolution never stops. Every species keeps changing to survive new challenges, does it? Jake asked. He gestured toward the hologram of Earth. Professor, could you tell the class how long life has existed on Earth? Professor Zixtal consulted her tablet. According to our records, approximately 3.8 billion years. And how long have humans existed? Modern humans have existed for roughly 300,000 years, Jake nodded. 300,000 years out of 3.8 billion. We're babies compared to some of the things that live in our oceans. He paused, letting that sink in. Now tell them how long sharks have existed. The professor's tentacles went very still as she read from her tablet. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. According to these records, sharks have existed for over 400 million years. The room erupted in surprised chatter. 400 million years was longer than most civilizations had existed. It was longer than most species could even imagine. 400 million years, Jake repeated. They were swimming in Earth's oceans before trees existed on land, before flowers had ever bloomed, before anything had ever walked on two legs or built a tool or looked up at the stars. Krexivor's scales had started to shift color, turning slightly gray. But that would mean... It means they're older than your entire species, Jake said calmly. Older than everyone in this room, older than most of the worlds you come from, and in all that time, do you know what they changed? What they evolved to become better at? No one answered. Nothing, Jake said. They didn't need to change. They were already perfect. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. She had grown up on Earth, swum in Earth's oceans, but she was starting to realize that she might not know them as well as she thought. Jake looked around the room at all the alien faces staring at him. You want to know about Earth's apex predators? Let me tell you about sharks. The hologram of Earth continued to rotate slowly in the center of the classroom. Jake stepped closer to it, his movement smooth and controlled. The alien students watched him with new attention. Something had changed in the room's atmosphere, though none of them could say exactly what. Sharks, Jake said quietly, reaching out to touch the holographic ocean with his finger. Where he touched, the image zoomed in, showing the deep blue water that covered most of his home planet. Most of you probably think they're just fish. Big fish, maybe, but still just fish. Professor Zixtal's tentacles moved in slow waves, a sign of deep concentration in her species. According to our database, sharks are cartilaginous fish native to Earth's oceans. They range in size from small bottom dwellers to large pelagic species. That's what your database says, Jake agreed. But your database was written by scientists who visited Earth for a few months and studied dead specimens in laboratories. They never saw a living shark in its natural environment. He paused. They never felt what it's like to be in the water with one. Krexvor shifted in his seat, his earlier confidence beginning to crack. What do you mean, felt what it's like? Jake turned to look at the large saurian directly. I mean that when you're in the water with a shark, you understand something that can't be written in any database. You understand that you're in the presence of something that has spent 400 million years learning how to kill. The room had gone completely silent. Even the soft humming of the station's life support system seemed louder than usual. Let me tell you what 400 million years of evolution looks like, Jake continued. He gestured to the hologram, and somehow his voice carried to every corner of the room despite remaining calm and quiet. First, they're skeletons. Your species have bones, right? Heavy, solid bones that protect your organs but weigh you down. Several students nodded. Sharks don't have bones. Their entire skeleton is made of cartilage, lighter than bone, more flexible than bone, and it never stops growing. A shark's skeleton bends and moves with the water instead of fighting against it. They become part of the ocean itself. Zetklik's four arms click together nervously. But without bones, how do they maintain structural integrity during high-speed pursuits? That's the beauty of it, Jake said. They don't need to maintain anything. Their whole body is designed for one thing: moving through water faster and more efficiently than anything else that has ever lived. Their skin isn't covered in scales like your people, Krexvor. It's covered in tiny teeth. Teeth? Glubaria's voice bubbled through her water helmet. On their skin? Millions of tiny teeth called denticles. They're arranged in a pattern that reduces drag and increases speed. When a shark moves through water, it's like the ocean itself is helping it go faster. But here's the thing that should really worry you. Those skin teeth also work as armor. Try to grab a shark, and it's like grabbing a living file that can cut through your hands. Professor Zixtel's skin had shifted to a pale green, the color her species showed when processing disturbing information. This is quite different from our database entries. Your database doesn't mention their senses either, does it? Jake asked. Let me guess. It probably says they have good hearing and decent eyesight. The professor consulted her tablet. Yes, that's essentially what it says. Jake smiled, but there was no humor in it. Sharks can smell a single drop of blood in 25 million drops of water. One drop, in an ocean, from miles away. He let that sink in before continuing. Their hearing is so sensitive they can detect the sound of a fish's heart beating from hundreds of feet away. They can sense the electrical fields generated by living creatures' nervous systems. The alien students were staring at him now with something that looked like horror growing in their eyes. You know what that means? Jake asked. It means that if you're in the water with a shark, it knows you're there before you know it's there. It can smell your blood even if you're not bleeding. It can hear your heart beating faster when you get scared. It can literally sense the electricity in your brain when you think. Krexvor's yellow eyes had grown wide. That's impossible. No predator needs senses that advanced. No predator except one that has spent 400 million years becoming the perfect hunter, Jake replied. But we're not even to the scary part yet. This isn't the scary part, Lisa whispered. She had grown up on Earth, but hearing Jake describe sharks this way was making her see them in a completely new light. Jake shook his head. The scary part is how they hunt. Your desert stalkers are fast, Krexvor, but they have to rest. Your crystal wasps are clever, Zitklik, but they have to think about their next move. Your void krakens are strong, Glubaria, but they have to grab onto their prey and hold on. He turned back to the hologram, zooming in on a section of ocean. Sharks don't rest. Some species never stop moving. If they stop swimming, they die. So they've evolved to shut down half their brain at a time to sleep while the other half keeps hunting. They don't think about their next move because they don't need to think. 400 million years of evolution has programmed every perfect action into their bodies. The room was so quiet that Jake could hear the breathing of every alien in the class. Some of them were breathing faster now. And they don't just grab their prey, Jake continued, they are their prey. When a great white shark decides to hunt something, it doesn't chase it or trick it or overpower it. It becomes a living missile. It launches itself through the water at speeds that would tear apart most of your starships. And when it hits... Jake paused, looking around the room at all the wide eyes and trembling appendages staring back at him. When it hits, the prey doesn't even have time to understand what happened. Jake moved closer to the holographic display of Earth's oceans. With a gesture, He zoomed the image deeper into the blue water, showing the darkness that lay beneath the surface. The alien students leaned forward despite themselves, drawn into the terrifying picture he was painting. "Let me tell you about the great white shark," Jake said, his voice carrying a tone that made several students unconsciously move back in their seats. "It's not the biggest predator in our oceans, but it might be the most perfect killing machine that evolution has ever created." The hologram shifted to show the silhouette of a massive torpedo-shaped creature moving through dark water. Even as, just a shadow, it looked dangerous. A great white can grow to 20 feet long and weigh over 5,000 pounds. But size isn't what makes it terrifying. What makes it terrifying is how it moves. Jake's eyes reflected the blue light from the hologram. When a great white decides to hunt, it doesn't swim toward its prey. It disappears. Professor Zixtal's tentacles had curled into tight spirals, a defensive posture her species took when sensing danger. "What do you mean disappears?" Great whites are ambush predators. They sink down into the deep water where the light doesn't reach, and they become invisible. Their backs are dark gray, so when you look down from above, you can't see them against the deep ocean. Their bellies are white, so when you look up from below, you can't see them against the bright surface. Crexivor's claws were digging into his desk, leaving small scratches in the metal. "But surely prey animals can sense them approaching," Jake shook his head slowly. "That's the beautiful horror of it. A great white can hold perfectly still in the water, using just tiny movements of its fins to stay in position. It watches its prey swimming above, calculating distance and speed. And then, when the moment is perfect, it strikes." He gestured to the hologram, and the shadow of the shark suddenly exploded upward through the water with terrifying speed. Great white can accelerate from 0 to 25 miles per hour in a single second. It launches itself upward like a living torpedo, and when it reaches its target... Jake paused, watching the faces around him grow pale. "It doesn't just bite. It becomes airborne." "Airborne?" Zitklik's voice was barely a whisper. "Great whites can launch their entire body completely out of the water. 5,000 pounds of perfect predator flying through the air. They call it breaching, and it's one of the most terrifying sights in nature. The prey never sees it coming. One second they're swimming peacefully on the surface, and the next second they're inside the jaws of a creature that jumped out of the ocean to catch them." Glubaria made a sound like water gurgling down a drain. Even though her species lived in the ocean, she was beginning to understand that Earth's oceans were something entirely different from her homeworld seas. "But that's just the normal ones," Jake continued, his voice dropping even quieter. "Let me tell you about the deep-sea species." The hologram shifted again, showing the darkest depths of Earth's oceans. Here, no light from the surface could reach. It was a world of eternal darkness and crushing pressure. In the deepest parts of our oceans, there are sharks that make the great white look friendly. Jake's words seemed to echo in the silent classroom. The Greenland shark lives in the Arctic waters, in temperatures that would freeze most of your blood. It grows slowly, very slowly, and it never stops growing. He paused, letting the tension build. A Greenland shark can live for over 500 years. Some of the ones swimming in our oceans today were alive when humans were still learning to build wooden ships. They just keep getting bigger and bigger, decade after decade, century after century. And the whole time they're hunting. Professor Zixtal's skin had turned almost white, the color her species showed when experiencing extreme stress. 500 years? 500 years of hunting experience in a single creature, Jake confirmed. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is that they're nearly blind, so they hunt entirely by smell and the electrical senses I mentioned. They can track a wounded animal for days across hundreds of miles of ocean, following just the faintest trace of blood in the water. Several students were breathing heavily now. The idea of a nearly immortal predator that could track them across vast distances was clearly affecting them. Then there's the Goblin Shark, Jake continued mercilessly. It lives so deep in the ocean that humans have barely ever seen living ones. It has a jaw that can shoot out of its mouth like a missile, grabbing prey and pulling it back before the victim even knows what happened. The hologram showed a nightmarish creature with an extendable jaw mechanism that looked more like something from an engineer's blueprint than a living animal. And then, Jake said, his voice now barely above a whisper, there's the one that doesn't exist anymore, the Megalodon. The word seemed to hang in the air like a curse. Megalodons were prehistoric sharks that could grow to 60 feet long. Their jaws were so big that a human could stand inside them without touching the teeth. Their bite force was stronger than the pressure systems on most starships. Jake looked around the room at the terrified faces staring back at him. They were so perfectly designed for killing that they hunted whales. Creatures the size of your transport ships were just snacks to them. Krexvor's voice was shaking when he spoke. But they're extinct, right? They don't exist anymore? Jake smiled, and for the first time his smile looked genuinely frightening. That's what we tell ourselves. But the thing about Earth's oceans is that they're mostly unexplored. We've mapped more of the surface of our moon than we have of our own ocean floor. And sometimes, very rarely, we find teeth. Fresh teeth. Teeth that are too big to belong to any shark that's supposed to exist. The classroom was completely silent except for the sound of rapid breathing and the occasional click or gurgle of nervous alien physiological responses. But here's what you really need to understand, Jake said, his voice returning to its earlier, calm tone. Everything I've just told you about sharks, all of this horror that's making you afraid to even think about Earth's oceans. He paused, looking each alien student in the eye. This is just the beginning. The classroom was so quiet that Jake could hear his own heartbeat. Around him, alien students sat frozen in their seats, their minds trying to process what they had just learned about Earth's oceans. Some were breathing fast, others had stopped, breathing altogether. Professor Zixtal's tentacles hung limp at her sides, her skin a pale white that showed deep shock. Jake looked around the room at all the terrified faces staring back at him. Krexvor's yellow eyes were wide with something that looked like panic. Zitklik's forearms were wrapped around herself in a protective gesture. Globaria had sunk so low in her water-filled chair that only the top of her helmet was visible. You look scared, Jake observed calmly. Good. You should be scared. Anyone with sense would be terrified of creatures like that. He paused, letting his words sink in. But here's what I don't think you understand yet. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. She thought Jake was finished, that he had already revealed the worst of it. But the look on his face told her there was more coming. The thing about humans and sharks, Jake continued, his voice still perfectly calm, is that we don't just know about them. We don't just study them from a safe distance. We don't just read about them in books or watch recordings of them on screens. He stepped closer to the hologram of Earth's blue oceans. We swim with them. The words hit the classroom like a physical blow. Several students made sounds of disbelief. Krexvor's claws scraped against his desk as his hands clenched involuntarily. That's impossible, Professor Zixtal whispered, her voice barely audible. No intelligent species would voluntarily enter the hunting grounds of such predators. Jake's smile was gentle, almost sad. Every summer, millions of humans go to beaches all around Earth. They put on thin suits that offer no protection whatsoever, and they swim in the same waters where great whites hunt. They surf on boards, floating on the surface like wounded seals. They dive down to coral reefs where reef sharks patrol their territory. But surely they have weapons, Zitklik said desperately. Energy shields, protective armor, something. Nothing, Jake said simply. Just their bodies and whatever courage they can find. And here's the thing that would really blow your minds. Some humans do it for fun. The alien students stared at him as if he had just claimed that humans could breathe vacuum. We have something called cage diving, Jake explained. Humans get into metal cages and lower themselves into water where great whites are hunting. They go down there just to watch them, just to see what 400 million years of perfect evolution looks like up close. Globaria made a sound like a drain backing up. They put themselves in cages, with those things outside. Sometimes they don't even use cages, Jake said quietly. Some humans swim with great whites in open water, wearing nothing but diving suits. No barriers, no weapons, no protection except their knowledge and respect for the sharks. The room erupted in sounds of alien distress. Clicks, hisses, bubbles, and harmonics that spoke of fear and disbelief in a dozen different languages. But, why? Krexvor's voice cracked as he spoke. Why would anyone do something so insane? Jake was quiet for a long moment, thinking about how to explain something that even he didn't fully understand. Because they're beautiful, he said finally. Because they're perfect. Because when you see a shark in its natural environment, you're seeing something that has remained unchanged since before your species existed. You're looking at living history, at evolution's masterpiece. He gestured to the hologram again. And because we learned a long time ago that the ocean doesn't belong to us, it belongs to them. If we want to enter their world, we do it on their terms, with respect and humility. Professor Zixtal's tentacles were trembling. How many humans die from shark attacks each year? Jake's answer made the room go completely silent. Less than 10. 10? Krexvor's voice was barely a whisper. Less than 10 deaths per year worldwide from all shark species combined. Humans are more likely to be killed by lightning strikes or bee stings or falling coconuts. Jake looked around the room at the shocked faces. Do you know why shark attacks are so rare? No one answered. Because sharks don't want to eat us. We're not their natural prey. Most shark attacks happen because the shark mistakes a human for a seal or a fish, realizes its error, and lets go. They're not mindless killing machines. They're intelligent predators that have learned to coexist with us. Coexist? Zitklik's voice was full of disbelief. Every human child knows what a shark is, Jake said. We put them in our movies, on our flags, and our stories. We have an entire week of television programming dedicated to celebrating them. We've built our relationship with sharks on understanding and respect, not fear and violence. Lisa found her voice at last. My little brother has shark posters on his bedroom wall, she said softly. He wants to be a marine biologist when he grows up so he can study them. The alien students looked at her as if she had said her brother wanted to study demons. That's what you need to understand about humans, Jake said, his voice growing stronger. We didn't become the dominant species on Earth by being the strongest or the fastest or the most heavily armed. We became dominant by learning to survive alongside creatures that could kill us without effort. We learned to read their behavior, respect their space, and find ways to coexist with perfect predators. He looked directly at Krexvor. Your people hunt in packs because your prey can fight back. Our predators are so efficient that fighting back is pointless, so we learned different skills. We learned patience, observation, and respect. We learned to enter the territory of apex predators and come out alive. The Saurians' yellow eyes had lost all their earlier arrogance. Your people swim with creatures that have been perfecting their killing techniques for 400 million years? Every day, Jake confirmed. And here's the really crazy part. The sharks have learned to recognize us too. There are individual great whites that marine biologists have been swimming with for decades. The sharks know them, remember them, and choose not to harm them. Professor Zixtal's skin had shifted to a deep purple, the color her species showed when experiencing something beyond their understanding. This changes everything we thought we knew about human psychology and risk assessment. Jake smiled, and this time it was warm and genuine. Wait until I tell you about Australia. We haven't even talked about the spiders yet, or the snakes, or the crocodiles, or the jellyfish that can kill you with a touch, or the octopi that... He paused, noticing that several students looked like they might faint. Maybe that's a lesson for another day. Krexvor slowly stood up from his seat. His movements were careful, respectful, like someone approaching something dangerous that had chosen not to harm them. Jake, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. I thought humans were weak because you look soft and fragile. But I was wrong, wasn't I? Jake nodded. You were wrong about what strength means. Physical strength is easy. Any species can evolve, claws or armor or venom, but it takes a special kind of courage to share a world with perfect predators and find a way to make it work. The classroom remained silent for a long time. Finally, Professor Zixtal cleared her throat. I think, she said in a shaky voice, that tomorrow's lesson on evolutionary pressure and survival adaptations will focus entirely on Earth's biosphere. Class dismissed. As the alien students filed out of the room in subdued silence, Jake could hear them whispering to each other in their various languages. He caught fragments of conversations about humans swimming with monsters, about courage beyond understanding, about a species that had learned to dance with death and call it fun. Lisa walked over to him as the room emptied. "Jake," she said quietly, "remind me never to make you angry." Jake laughed, and the sound was warm and completely human. "Don't worry, Lisa, we save our real anger for much bigger problems than classroom bullies." As they left the room together, Krexvor caught up with them in the hallway. The large saurian moved carefully, respectfully, like someone who had just learned they were in the presence of something far more dangerous than they had imagined. "Jake," he said quietly, "your people really swim with these sharks for fun?" Jake grinned, showing his teeth in a gesture that the alien students were finally beginning to understand might be more significant than they had previously thought. "Wait until I tell you about surfers,"